I have 24 hours to find a husband, or I could lose my little sister. The words left Nia Bennett's lips at 11:17 on a Thursday night, and for one impossible second, the Halston room forgot how to breathe. A fork stopped halfway to a man's mouth. A champagne glass hovered above a white linen tablecloth. Even the soft notes from the grand piano seemed to disappear beneath the weight of what she had just said. Nia stood near the service station in a pressed black uniform, one hand gripping her phone, the other pressed against her mouth as if she could somehow pull the words back. She couldn't. 24 hours. That was what she had heard. 24 hours to prove that 8-year-old Sophie Bennett, the little girl Nia had raised since their mother died, belonged in a stable home. A real family, as someone had called it. Nia had spent 2 years becoming everything Sophie needed. Sister, guardian, homework helper, lunch packer, emergency contact. The person who checked beneath the bed for monsters and stayed awake when the electric bill was late. But tonight, standing beneath chandeliers that cost more than everything she owned, Nia felt as if none of it counted. I'm sorry, she whispered into the phone. Can you say that again? The attorney's voice was calm, but Nia barely heard the explanation that followed. Emergency hearing. Questions about stability. A relative challenging the placement. Documentation. Support system. Her mind caught only the sharpest pieces and turned them into panic. Around her, Manhattan's wealthiest diners continued pretending not to listen. Most of them failed. 24 hours, Nia repeated, her voice cracking. How am I supposed to build a family in 24 hours? A man at a nearby table gave a quiet laugh. Try a dating app, he muttered, earning a few uncomfortable smiles. Nia lowered her eyes. She had served men like him for years. Men who believed a woman in an apron existed only when they needed something. Normally, she could carry their words the same way she carried a tray, balanced, steady, without letting anything spill. Not tonight. Tonight, one tear escaped before she could stop it. Then another. I have 24 hours to find a husband, she said, more to herself than anyone else. That was when the chair moved. Its legs scraped across the marble floor, a simple sound, but somehow it cut through the room more cleanly than a shout. Heads turned. At the center table, Grant Whitmore rose to his full height. 39 years old. White. Immaculate charcoal suit. A billionaire CEO whose name appeared on buildings, financial reports, and invitations Nia would never receive. Until that moment, he had barely spoken to her beyond ordering black coffee. Now he looked directly at her. Not at the apron. Not at the name tag. At her. Nia wiped her face quickly, embarrassed by the attention. Sir, I'm sorry. I'll be right with your table. Grant glanced at the silver watch on his wrist. Then back at her. His expression did not soften, but something behind it changed. Something old. Something that recognized the sound of a person running out of time. You don't have 24 hours, he said. The room became still again. Nia stared at him. Grant checked his watch once more. It's 11:18. He stepped away from the table. You have 23 hours and 42 minutes. The man who had laughed stopped smiling. Nia's fingers tightened around her phone. I don't understand. Grant Whitmore, a man who had spent most of his life making other people stand when he entered a room, walked toward the waitress everyone else had chosen to watch fall apart. He stopped a few feet from her and asked the only question that mattered. What happens if you fail? Nia swallowed hard. When she answered, her voice was barely above a whisper. I lose my sister. Grant did not look at the curious diners. He did not reach for his wallet. He did not offer a check or make a promise he could not understand. He simply pulled out the empty chair beside his table. Sit down, Miss Bennett. Nia froze. Why? Grant looked at his watch one final time. Because the clock is already running. I cannot sit down, sir. I am working. Nia's answer came automatically, the way years of service had trained it into her. Keep moving. Keep smiling. Never let your private life become the customer's inconvenience. Grant Whitmore studied her for a moment, then looked toward the restaurant manager watching from across the room. Ethan Blake was already approaching, his expression tight with the kind of concern reserved not for employees, but for expensive guests who might complain. Nia, Ethan said quietly, perhaps you should take 5 minutes in the back. 5 minutes. As if 5 minutes could repair a life. Nia nodded, apologized to Grant, and disappeared through the swinging kitchen doors. She did not see him watching her leave. 18 hours earlier, Her morning had begun at 5:42 in a two-bedroom apartment in Queens, with a smoke detector chirping for a new battery and Sophie asleep sideways across her bed. Nia stood in the doorway holding two lunch bags, one pink and one brown, and smiled despite herself. "Soph, wake up." The blanket moved. 5 more minutes. "You said that 5 minutes ago." "Then I am consistent." Nia laughed. Sophie was 8 years old and already better at negotiating than most adults Nia served. By 6:30, breakfast was on the table. By 6:45, Nia had signed a school form, found a missing sneaker, braided Sophie's hair, and hidden an overdue electric bill beneath a grocery flyer. She did not want Sophie seeing the red letters. Children should worry about spelling tests, not payment deadlines. On the refrigerator hung a photograph of their mother, Denise Bennett, smiling between her two daughters at Coney Island. Nia touched the corner of it every morning. She never called it a ritual. Some things were too important to name. "You are coming to family reading day next week, right?" Sophie asked. Nia paused for half a second. She was scheduled for a double shift. Would not miss it. Sophie smiled, and just like that, Nia had another problem to solve. After school drop-off, Nia rode the subway into Manhattan, changed into her uniform, and worked the lunch shift without sitting down. At 3, she studied hospitality management notes during her break. At 4, she called Sophie's after-school program. At 5, she started dinner service. This was her life. Not glamorous, not tragic. Built one small promise at a time. She had never asked anyone to save her. 2 years earlier, when their mother died after a long illness, Nia had been 25. Sophie had been 6. There had been forms, interviews, home visits, questions asked by strangers who measured family in paperwork. Nia answered every one. She found a larger apartment, took extra shifts, learned how to make pancakes shaped like stars because Sophie stopped eating after the funeral. She became the person who stayed. That evening, just before leaving for work, Nia had noticed a thick envelope pushed beneath the apartment door. She almost opened it. Then Sophie called from the bedroom, asking for help with a science project, and Nia placed the envelope on the kitchen counter. She would read it later. Later arrived at 10:56 that night, when Sophie's babysitter sent a photograph of the opened letter. By 11:17, Nia was standing inside one of Manhattan's most elegant restaurants, learning that someone was challenging the only family she had left. Now, alone in the employee hallway, she pressed both hands against the cold metal sink and forced herself to breathe. The door opened behind her. She expected Ethan. It was Grant. Nia straightened immediately. Guests are not allowed back here. Neither are billionaires, apparently. She almost smiled. Almost. Grant placed a business card on the counter between them. "I know someone who can explain what that letter actually means." Nia looked at the card but did not touch it. "And what do you want?" Grant's face changed. Just slightly. "Nothing." Nia finally looked him in the eyes. "Men like you always want something." Grant was silent. Then he nodded once, as if she had said something he respected. "Then do not trust me." He pushed the card an inch closer. "Trust the second opinion." Grant Whitmore had spent 20 years building a life in which nobody told him no. Banks returned his calls before the second ring. Board members changed schedules when he entered a city. Entire companies waited for his signature before thousands of people knew whether they would have jobs on Monday morning. Yet standing in a narrow employee hallway beneath a flickering fluorescent light, Grant found himself strangely impressed by a waitress who would not even pick up his business card. Nia looked at it as if it might come with invisible strings. "A second opinion from whom?" she asked. "Daniel Mercer. Family law. He owes me a favor." "That sounds expensive." "The phone call is free." "Nothing around you is free." Grant almost answered, then stopped. She was right more often than he liked. "Call him yourself," he said. "Do not mention my name if that makes you more comfortable." Nia folded her arms. "Your name is printed on the card." For the first time that night, Grant smiled. It was brief, almost unfamiliar. "Then I have made this unnecessarily difficult." Before Nia could respond, Ethan appeared at the doorway and reminded her that table 12 was waiting. The moment ended. Nia returned to the dining room. Grant returned to his table, but something had shifted. Hours earlier, Grant's own day had begun 40 stories above Manhattan, in a penthouse so quiet he could hear the heating system click on before sunrise. At 5:30 every morning, his driver waited downstairs. At 6 o'clock, Grant reviewed international markets. By 7:15, He was inside the glass headquarters of Whitmore Capital Group, where people lowered their voices when he passed. He wore discipline like armor. No wasted words. No unnecessary attachments. No surprises. His employees called him demanding. Business magazines called him brilliant. His mother called him impossible. Grant preferred efficient. That Thursday, he had approved a $900 million acquisition before lunch and rejected a partnership proposal before the other company's chief executive had finished presenting it. Numbers were clean. Numbers did not cry in restaurant hallways. Numbers did not ask why you had failed to show up. At 4:06 that afternoon, his phone displayed a reminder he had never created and never deleted. Emily's birthday. Grant stared at the screen for 12 seconds. Then he locked it. His younger sister had been gone for 7 years, but her last voicemail remained saved in 3 separate backups. He never listened to the whole message. He never needed to. The first sentence was enough. Grant, I needed you to show up. He had been in London closing a deal when she called. He had promised to call back. He did not. By the time he understood how badly she needed her brother, the moment had already passed, and Grant learned something money never allowed him to admit publicly. Being important everywhere could still mean being absent where it mattered. That night, he had gone to the Halston room because dinner with investors required his presence. Then Nia Bennett had broken down 20 feet away from him, and something in her voice had reached a place he had spent 7 years keeping locked. At 12:03 in the morning, the restaurant finally began to empty. Nia changed out of her uniform and stepped through the employee entrance into the cold Manhattan air. Grant was standing beside a black sedan. She stopped. Please tell me you are not waiting for me. I am waiting for my driver. The driver was already holding the rear door open. Nia raised an eyebrow. Grant sighed. Fine. I am waiting for you. Why? He looked at her for a long moment. Because I know what it costs to arrive too late. Nia's expression changed, but only slightly. Grant held out the business card again. This time she took it. One phone call, she said. One phone call, he agreed. Nia looked down at the number, then back at him. And after that, I owe you nothing. Grant nodded. That is the first sensible deal anyone has offered me all day. At 12:21 in the morning, Nia Bennett learned that panic had translated the letter into something it had never actually said. She stood beneath the awning outside the Halston room with Grant a few feet away while Daniel Mercer spoke through her phone. The attorney's voice was calm, precise, and almost painfully patient. Ms. Bennett, listen carefully. The court is not requiring you to get married. Nia closed her eyes. For several seconds, the city seemed to move without her. Yellow cabs passed through wet streets. A delivery truck rumbled at the corner. Somewhere down the block, someone laughed. Then why did my previous attorney tell me they would question whether Sophie had a stable family? Because they will, Daniel said. But marriage is not the same thing as stability. Nia opened her eyes. Grant said nothing. Your aunt, Lorraine Bennett, filed an emergency petition this afternoon. She claims your work schedule is unpredictable, your income is insufficient, and your support system is too limited to provide long-term care. Nia's grip tightened around the phone. My aunt has seen Sophie 3 times in 2 years. Then we document that. She lives in a 4-bedroom house in Connecticut. A bigger house does not automatically make a better home. Nia looked across the sidewalk at Grant. For the first time that night, hope appeared, but it was fragile. Daniel continued. The problem is timing. The hearing was moved forward because Lorraine claims she is relocating soon and wants temporary placement decided immediately. We need your lease, employment records, school contacts, childcare arrangements, medical authorization, and anyone who can verify your role in Sophie's daily life. Nia's hope flickered. By tomorrow? By tomorrow. The silence returned. Not the helpless silence from the restaurant. This one had edges. Lists. Deadlines. Things that could be done. So I do not need a husband, Nia whispered. Grant looked away, perhaps hiding the smallest trace of amusement. No, Daniel said. You need evidence. Nia covered her face with one hand. I announced that in front of half of Manhattan. I have heard worse misunderstandings after midnight. The call ended with an appointment at 7:30 the next morning. Nia lowered the phone and stared at the sidewalk. You can laugh now. I am considering it. She looked up sharply. Grant's expression remained composed. Do not. Then I will continue considering it privately. Against every reasonable instinct, Nia laughed. It lasted only a second, but it changed the air between them. Then reality returned. I need to get home. Grant opened the sedan door. I can take you. No, it is after midnight. And the subway still works. Nia. She stiffened. Do not do that. Do what? Say my name like you have authority over my decisions. Grant paused. Most people adjusted themselves around him. Nia expected him to adjust. Fair, he said. Would you accept a ride if I promised not to make any decisions for you? She studied him. Why are you still here? Grant could have given her an easy answer. Because it was late. Because Daniel was his friend. Because helping cost him nothing. Instead, he told the truth. I do not know yet. Nia searched his face, then glanced at the clock on her phone. Queens, she said. That is not a yes. It is the address you need if you are offering a ride. 25 minutes later, Grant Whitmore stepped into a building where the hallway light only worked when someone tapped the switch twice. Nia had not invited him upstairs. Then she discovered the babysitter had left after Nia's neighbor, Mrs. Alvarez, agreed to stay with Sophie. Grant carried the box of documents Nia had collected from the restaurant office. Nothing more. Inside apartment 4C, the refrigerator hummed beside a table covered in school papers, crayons, unopened mail, and a cardboard solar system with Saturn leaning sideways. Sophie appeared in the hallway wearing purple pajamas and holding a stuffed rabbit. She looked at Grant, then at Nia, then back at Grant. Is that the husband? Nia closed her eyes. Grant stood perfectly still. Sophie waited. Finally, he cleared his throat. No, the little girl nodded thoughtfully. Good. Grant blinked. Good. Sophie hugged the rabbit closer. You look too expensive. For the second time that night, Nia Bennett laughed. And for the first time in years, Grant Whitmore entered a room where nobody cared how much he was worth. By 1:14 in the morning, Nia's kitchen table had disappeared beneath 2 years of proof. School attendance records, rent receipts, pay stubs, medical forms, emergency contacts, notes from teachers, a photograph of Sophie holding a science fair ribbon. None of it looked powerful. None of it looked like the kind of evidence that moved markets or filled business magazines. But to Nia, every page represented a morning she had shown up, a bill she had found a way to pay, a promise she had refused to break. Grant stood near the counter with his jacket folded over one arm, while Nia organized documents into piles. Employment records, she said. School records. Medical records. Childcare. Grant reached for a stack. I can help. Nia placed her hand over it before he could touch anything. You can stand there. He looked at her hand, then at her. You are unusually strict with volunteers. You volunteered yourself. That is true. Sophie sat at the table coloring a picture of 3 astronauts on the moon, while Mrs. Alvarez made coffee strong enough to keep the entire building awake. At 1:32, Grant's phone rang. Vanessa Cole, his public relations director, had called 6 times. He finally answered. Grant, where are you? Queens. Silence. Why? Grant looked at Nia, who immediately shook her head. Helping someone organize documents. Another silence. Longer this time. At 1:30 in the morning, the documents are apparently nocturnal. Nia covered a smile. Vanessa did not. You have an investor breakfast at 8. Move it. You never move investor meetings. Grant looked at the small kitchen, at Sophie's crooked solar system, at the woman sorting her life into labeled folders because strangers would soon decide whether her love looked stable enough on paper. I am aware. He ended the call. Nia stared at him. Do not cancel your life for this. I moved breakfast. That is what people like you call canceling. People like me? People who can move 8 o'clock because they feel like it. Grant leaned against the counter. And people like you? Nia did not look up. We get fired. The words landed quietly. Grant glanced at the clock. Then let me fix that. Nia stopped sorting. No, I can call your manager. Absolutely not. Nia, you need tomorrow off. I need my job. I can explain the situation. And then what? She finally looked at him. Ethan learns that Grant Whitmore personally called about one waitress. And suddenly, I am not Nia anymore. I am the employee with a billionaire standing behind her. Grant opened his mouth. She did not let him speak. I know you were trying to help. But you keep reaching for the biggest tool in the room because you have never had to ask whether using it might crush something smaller. The kitchen went still. Grant had been challenged by senators, investors, competitors, and journalists. None of them had ever made him feel as unprepared as Nia Bennett did in that moment. Then tell me what helping looks like, he said. Nia's expression softened, but only slightly. She pointed toward the table. Find every document dated before last January and put it in order. Grant looked at the mountain of paper. That is helping? Tonight, yes. He removed his watch and set it beside the coffee maker. All right. For the next 2 hours, the billionaire chief executive of Whitmore Capital Group sorted school forms while Nia built a timeline of Sophie's care. No assistants. No lawyers. No shortcuts. At 3:47, Sophie fell asleep with her head on folded arms. Grant quietly moved a stack of papers away from her face. Nia watched him. You are better at this when you stop trying to be important. Grant looked at the sleeping child. I am beginning to notice. At 5:06, Daniel called. His voice had changed. Nia, I found something in the petition. She straightened. What? Your aunt claims you left Sophie without approved supervision on 6 separate nights. Nia went pale. That is not true. I believe you. But someone submitted records to support it. Grant slowly stood. Nia gripped the phone. What records? Daniel paused. Records from the Halston room. The records said Nia had worked until after midnight on 6 nights when no approved caregiver was listed for Sophie. The truth was simpler. Mrs. Alvarez had watched her every time. But Mrs. Alvarez was a neighbor, not a licensed child care provider, and the restaurant schedules had been copied without the messages, school pickup logs, and emergency forms that showed where Sophie had actually been. By 5:19 in the morning, Nia was standing beside the kitchen window, staring at a city beginning to turn gray. Lorraine knew where I worked, she said. She asked me for my schedule months ago. She said she wanted to understand how I managed everything. Grant's jaw tightened, but his voice stayed calm. Daniel can challenge the records. With what? Nia asked. My word. With the truth. She gave him a tired look. The truth is not always the loudest person in the room. Grant had no answer for that. Sophie stirred at the table and slowly lifted her head. Her hair was flattened on one side, and a faint red line from her sleeve crossed her cheek. Is it morning? Almost, Nia said, immediately softening. Go back to bed, baby. Sophie looked at the papers, then at Grant. Are we in trouble? Nia opened her mouth, but Sophie was already watching her too carefully. Children knew when adults were building walls out of gentle words. Grant crouched beside the table, keeping a respectful distance. Your sister is working very hard to solve something complicated. Sophie studied him. Rich people say complicated when they do not want kids to know things. Nia closed her eyes. Sophie. What? It is true. Grant almost smiled. You may be right. Sophie turned toward him. Why are you helping us? The question was simple. Grant's first answer was ready. Because I can. He almost said it. Then he remembered Nia's warning about the biggest tool in the room. Because your sister needed someone to make a phone call. Sophie frowned. That is not the real answer. Grant became still. Nia watched from across the kitchen. Sophie hugged her stuffed rabbit against her chest. You look sad when you think nobody is looking. No board member had ever spoken to Grant that directly. No investor had ever noticed that much. He looked down at his hands. I had a younger sister, he said. Nia did not move. Her name was Emily. She needed me once, and I thought I had more time than I did. Sophie's voice became quieter. Where is she now? Grant looked toward the pale morning light beyond the window. She is gone. The kitchen changed. Not dramatically. No one gasped. No music rose. There was only a child, a tired woman, and a man who had finally said aloud the sentence he spent 7 years avoiding. Were you mean to her? Sophie asked. No, Grant swallowed. I was busy. Sophie considered that. Sometimes busy feels mean. Nia looked away. Grant nodded slowly. Yes, sometimes it does. Sophie climbed down from the chair and walked toward him. She did not hug him. She simply placed the stuffed rabbit on the table between them. You can hold Mr. Buttons. For 1 minute. Grant stared at the worn rabbit. Why? Because he helps when people miss somebody. Grant picked it up carefully, as though it were something far more valuable than anything he owned. Nia watched his shoulders change. Just an inch. But enough. At 6:02, Mrs. Alvarez knocked on the door carrying a folder. Inside were handwritten calendars, text message printouts, and photographs from every night she had watched Sophie. I keep everything, she said. My daughter says I am a hoarder. Today, maybe I am a genius. Nia laughed through exhausted tears. Daniel reviewed the documents by phone. This helps. A lot. Then he paused. But we still need to know how Lorraine obtained internal employment records. Grant looked at Nia. Nia looked at the Halston Room logo printed across the copied schedules. The answer was no longer somewhere far away. It was waiting at the restaurant where she had spent years believing that keeping her head down would keep her safe. By 7-Eleven that morning, Nia was back inside the Halston Room. But the restaurant looked different without candlelight and expensive conversation. Chairs rested upside down on tables. The piano was silent. Sunlight exposed every fingerprint on the glass doors. Ethan Blake stood near the bar with a cup of coffee and the expression of a man who had already decided he was being inconvenienced. "You were supposed to be here at 10, he said. "I need to ask you about my employment records." Ethan's eyes moved to Grant, who stood several feet behind her. "Why is Mr. Whitmore here?" Nia did not turn around. "He is not speaking for me." Grant heard the boundary and respected it. Ethan set down his coffee. "What records?" Nia placed the copied schedules on the bar. "These were submitted in a custody petition involving my sister. They came from this restaurant." Ethan looked at the pages too quickly. That was the first thing Grant noticed. Nia noticed it too. "I did not authorize anyone to release them," she said. Ethan sighed. "Nia, schedules are not state secrets. They are my employment information. Your aunt called weeks ago. She said she was helping with a family matter." The room became very quiet. "You gave her my schedule?" I answered a few questions. "Without asking me." Ethan's voice hardened. "I was trying to help." Nia stared at him. She had heard those words twice in one night from two very different men. One had learned to ask what help looked like. The other had decided for her. "Did you tell her I was unreliable?" Ethan looked away. "That was enough. I told her you had missed opportunities for additional shifts because of childcare issues." Nia felt something inside her settle. Not break. Settle. For years, she had believed silence was professionalism. She had smiled when guests forgot her name. She had covered shifts, stayed late, arrived early, and accepted every judgment as the price of keeping a paycheck. Now her private life had become evidence in someone else's argument. "I have worked here for 4 years, she said. "I have never missed a scheduled shift without notice." "That is not the point." "Then what is?" Ethan glanced toward Grant. "This conversation is becoming inappropriate." Nia almost laughed. "Now privacy matters?" Grant stepped forward, but Nia lifted one hand without looking at him. He stopped. Ethan saw it. So did Nia. Power was standing behind her, and for once, it was willing to wait. "I need written confirmation of what you shared and when," Nia said. "Daniel Mercer will contact you." Ethan's face changed at the attorney's name. "You brought a lawyer into this?" "Someone else brought my family into it." At 8:04, Nia left the restaurant with an email from Ethan confirming the call from Lorraine and the information he had provided. It should have felt like a victory. Instead, her phone began vibrating before she reached the sidewalk. One message, then 5, then 20. Vanessa Cole called Grant. He answered, listened for 10 seconds, and closed his eyes. "What happened?" Nia asked. Grant turned his phone toward her. A photograph from the night before showed him standing beside Nia outside the restaurant. Another showed them entering her apartment building. Above the images was a headline claiming that Manhattan's most private billionaire had spent the night with a waitress after an emotional restaurant scene. Nia stared at the screen. Her stomach dropped. "That is not what happened." "I know. Sophie's hearing is today." "I know. They're going to make this look like I traded one problem for a rich man." Grant's phone rang again. "Vanessa, the board, reporters." A machine built to protect his reputation had awakened. Nia looked at him, anger rising beneath exhaustion. "You said you were helping me keep my family." Grant lowered the phone. "I am." She pointed at the headline. "Then why does the whole world suddenly think I sold myself to get one?" Grant did not answer immediately, and that silence frightened Nia more than a polished promise would have. Cars moved along the avenue. Phones kept vibrating. Somewhere behind the restaurant doors, the city was preparing for another ordinary morning, while hers seemed determined to become public property. "Say something," Nia said. Grant looked at the headline again. "If I speak now, they will make me the center of the story." "You already are." "That does not mean I should stay there." Before Nia could respond, Vanessa's black sport utility vehicle pulled to the curb. She stepped out holding 2 phones and enough frustration for everyone on the sidewalk. "Grant, we need to go. The board is waiting. Reporters are outside headquarters, and someone is already asking whether this affects the Whitmore Foundation." Her eyes moved to Nia. Not cruelly. Efficiently. That almost felt worse. We can release a statement saying Mr. Whitmore offered assistance during a personal emergency and that there is no relationship. Nia's face tightened. A personal emergency? Vanessa paused. I am trying to protect both of you. By making me sound like a problem he accidentally walked into. Grant looked at Vanessa. No statement. Grant. Not yet. Nia stepped back. I have a hearing in less than 3 hours. I do not have time to become a public relations strategy. She turned toward the subway entrance. Grant followed one step, then stopped himself. Nia. She faced him. You asked what helping looks like. Right now, it looks like leaving me alone. The words landed. Grant nodded. All right. And he let her go. At 10:26, Nia sat beside Daniel Mercer in a family court conference room with Sophie's school records, Mrs. Alvarez's calendars, Ethan's email, and 4 years of evidence arranged in neat folders. Lorraine Bennett sat across from them in a Navy suit, speaking softly about stability, opportunity, and what she called a more traditional home. Nia listened without interrupting. Then Daniel presented the facts. Sophie had missed fewer school days under Nia's care than before. Her grades had improved. Her pediatric appointments were current. Her teacher described Nia as consistently involved. Mrs. Alvarez confirmed every disputed evening. Ethan's email showed that incomplete employment information had been shared without Nia's permission. The truth did not arrive dramatically. It arrived page by page, date by date, morning by morning. At 11:48, the temporary placement request was denied. The larger guardianship review would continue, but Sophie would remain with Nia. Nia closed her eyes. For the first time in nearly 13 hours, she breathed without counting the seconds. Then Daniel's phone lit up. You may want to see this. Across Manhattan, Grant Whitmore stood before cameras at a scheduled corporate press conference. Vanessa had prepared a statement. The board had approved it. Grant folded the paper and placed it on the podium. Nia Bennett did not ask me for money, he said. She did not ask me for a job. She did not ask me to rescue her. Reporters went silent. She was facing a family crisis, and I offered a phone number. Everything that followed, she handled with more discipline than most executives I know. A reporter called out a question about their relationship. Grant ignored it. This morning, a working woman was turned into a headline because people found it easier to imagine a scandal than to imagine that someone might help her without expecting ownership in return. Nia stared at the screen. Grant continued. Her private life is not entertainment. Her dignity is not a rumor. And if my name helped create this attention, then my name can be used to end it. He stepped away from the podium before anyone could turn the moment into something about him. Nia lowered Daniel's phone. Sophie reached for her hand. Is he in trouble? Nia looked at the frozen image of Grant walking away from the cameras. Maybe. Sophie thought for a moment. Did he do the right thing? Nia squeezed her hand. Yes. Sophie nodded. Then maybe that is what standing up costs. 6 months later, Nia Bennett walked into the Halston room through the front entrance. No uniform. No name tag. No tray balanced against one shoulder. She wore a simple navy dress beneath a winter coat, and Sophie walked beside her carrying a folder decorated with gold stars. The restaurant had changed management after an internal review of employee privacy practices. Ethan Blake was gone. Nia had left too, but not because anyone had rescued her. She had completed the hospitality management program she had been studying for between shifts and accepted an assistant operations position at a boutique hotel in Brooklyn. Better hours, better pay, more time for family reading day. The guardianship review had ended 3 weeks earlier. Sophie was staying exactly where she had always believed she belonged. With Nia, Grant waited at a quiet table near the window. He stood when they approached. Sophie pointed at him. You still look expensive. Grant glanced down at his suit. I wore the cheapest one I own. That is probably still a bad answer. Nia laughed as they sat down. Over 6 months, Grant had learned that Sophie rarely asked questions unless she already had an opinion. He had also learned not to arrive with gifts. The first time he brought an elaborate science kit, Sophie thanked him and spent the evening playing with the cardboard box. After that, Grant brought books. Sometimes pizza, mostly himself. He and Nia had not become a fairy tale overnight. There had been no sudden proposal. No mansion waiting at the end of her struggle. There had been coffee after work. A school science fair where Grant stood in the back and applauded too loudly. Long conversations about Emily. Arguments about boundaries. Apologies without excuses. Trust built slowly enough to be real. After dinner, Sophie handed Nia the folder. Inside was a certificate from school recognizing Nia as a community volunteer. Nia stared at it longer than she expected. You sign me up for this? Sophie smiled. You said people should help when they can. Grant leaned back. That sounds familiar. Do not start, Nia said. I said nothing. Your face did. When dessert arrived, Grant placed a small black box on the table. Nia froze. Sophie's eyes widened. Oh, this is interesting. Nia looked at Grant. Do not you dare. Open it. Grant. Nia. She narrowed her eyes, then lifted the lid. Inside was a key. She stared at it. What is this? The key you left in my car yesterday. Silence. Then Sophie burst into laughter. Nia covered her face. You put my own apartment key in a jewelry box? I was told I needed a better sense of humor. Who told you that? Sophie raised her hand. Grant smiled. I had professional guidance. Nia shook her head, laughing despite herself. Grant's expression softened. For the record, I know better than to solve your life for you. Nia closed the box. Good. I am still learning. Also good. Outside, snow began falling over Manhattan, soft against the windows, turning the city quieter than either of them remembered it. Sophie excused herself to inspect the dessert display, after making Grant promise not to make any important decisions while she was gone. For a moment, Nia and Grant sat alone. You know, Nia said, the first night we met, I thought you were the most arrogant man in New York. Only New York. Do not ruin the compliment. Grant smiled. Then the smile faded into something more honest. Dinner tomorrow? Nia studied him. That depends. On what? Are you asking as Grant Whitmore, billionaire chief executive who thinks every problem has a solution? Grant removed his watch and placed it on the table, just as he had done in her kitchen 6 months earlier. No, then who is asking? He looked at her without the boardroom, without the headlines, without the weight of a name that opened doors before he reached them. Just Grant. Nia let the silence sit between them. Not empty, not uncertain, earned. Then ask me again. Grant smiled. Nia Bennett, would you have dinner with me tomorrow? She smiled back. Yes. Across the room, Sophie raised both thumbs in the air. Grant laughed, and Nia realized that the most important thing he had done was never the phone call, the lawyer, or the public statement. He had learned to stay. He had spent his life believing power meant being able to change circumstances. Nia taught him something harder. Sometimes power meant listening. Sometimes love meant making room. And sometimes family began not when someone promised forever, but when they quietly showed up again tomorrow.